Hello, my name is Dede. Welcome to my craft.
You posted something recently. So you said your Instagram username
Mm,
translates to your grandmother's house.
yeah,
And I think that's like very beautiful. So what is it that your grandmother gave you that
mm.
you think you still carry in everything that you do?
That's a very loaded question,
Oh,
but thank you for asking.
yeah.
So yeah, my Instagram name Ile Bamidele basically means it can be said in two ways: Ile, or Ile. So Ile means house, Ile means place. It can also mean landmark. It can mean a territory. So yes, or a piece of land. So if I say Ile, Bamidele, it means Bamidele's landmark. So if you look at the description, you also see history and
Yeah, yeah.
landmark, yeah, historical landmark. So there's also that, and it can also mean Bamidele's house. So it's actually both at the same time. But what my grandmother gave me, my grandmother was basically my parents in a very involved way. When I think of my education as well, she paid for it, right? And very maternal, very matriarchal in all her affairs, the politics of running the household, the finance, and and I think that that has informed even my worldview, where maybe I'm running ahead of myself, but it was very natural to see women in power, and coming out of university, my first job experience was always women running the show. My second job experience, women. Third job experience, fourth as well. So when I hear sometimes people say, oh, they experience, what's the word, discrimination in the workplace, I'm always I don't know how to take it. I believe them, but it has never been my reality where women are never in power. So I think that's one thing. Like I said, the education, but there's also the politics and yeah,
Yeah, so your work with research, you said you started with writing,
yes,
self-reflective writing.
yeah,
Um, so what first made you want to take the research like seriously?
seriously. So I mean, like I said, I've always been a writer, and it's one of those things that people say, but it's true, as cliche as it sounds, right? I remember writing in notebooks, trying to copy all the cheap stories that were like 100 naira, 150, 50 naira at the time, trying to reenact my own story. And I started reading bigger novels. And these stories were stories I also shared with my mom. It was a back and forth. I will read, she will read, depending on who found the books first. If I went out, I saw the book, I guess I'll bring home. And then it was always a competition to finish first. But from reading those stories, and like, I was even telling someone yesterday that there was nothing that we couldn't read. I couldn't read, you know. My mom didn't say, don't read this kind of story. I read anything and everything, old newspapers as well. I think there was even a time, I can't remember where she got them from. There was just a lot of newspapers. And at the time, funny enough, it wasn't out of discipline, just there was no television in the house. So that was the only thing I could use my free time to do. The puzzles in the newspapers, all the sections in the newspapers, people sending in their dilemmas, their agonies. So it was until recently I even started to remember that part of my history where there was a lot of newspapers in my house as well growing up. But again, bringing that into my practice it was a way to see how Nigerians can be more involved in their self-reflective stories. And it mattered to me that it wasn't just restricted to just writers. I wanted chefs, doctors, engineers, painters, market women, drivers, even the cab guys, everybody telling their own stories so that we can have, you know, a way that when we come back to the present time, we see stories of the current time. We want to know what's happening in 2026, but when we were in 2050, for instance, how were people living their lives. But now the research part was, again, like I said, like I've been saying, is digging into the past, and then finding similar threads of what's happening now in politics, in economics, in inflation, to see that these things were not, it's not foreign. It has happened before. Just the numbers are bigger when you think of the inflation. Think of how much was kerosene when it was 14 naira. When it increased to 14 naira, people complained. You know, and one of my workshops was to research on. I chose a particular case study here. It was early this year in February, 2005 was my case study here, and it was important to me because before now I have this workbook. It's an Excel sheet where I have events. I remember from my head, and then I have just the events, I have the dates, the sources where I'm getting them from, and it's not only restricted to old newspapers, it's old YouTube videos, advertisements, radio ads, all of those things, because I remember some radio ads, I remember some television adverts as well. And then I remember certain national world events when you think of the eclipse of the moon or sun, was in 2005 as well. So that particular memory struck me because I was on the assembly ground, and I remember my classmates were all, called outside to watch witness this event. And it was also the year that the new 1,000 naira note was introduced to Nigeria, 2005. So digging back, the research was more, okay, so who was the president? What was the monetary policies happening at the time? How did Nigerians react to that? What were people saying generally in terms of that period? But then zooming out of Nigeria, what was happening in Africa? What was happening in the globe? Then you see that there were similar threads. There was a global, oil shocks. That was why at the time there was, the increments in fuel, kerosene. But normal Nigerians, everyday Nigerians wouldn't know that. Just see that, okay, there's an increase. But there was the reason why that was happening. It was geopolitical. So anyway, that's basically my, research journey. It's just curiosity and contextualizing that to the present and making sure that people are also able to document themselves using reflection as a tool to then write their own stories.
I think based on what you just said, like information is very powerful. So based on that, what is the importance of people having information?
What is the importance of people having information? Whoa, that question is a bit. I love it, but the importance of people having information is very crucial. One, to me, because Nigerians, we love to say this isn't working, this isn't happening, you know. But I think it's also good for us to know, like I said, can we go back? Let's look at our history. You know, there's nothing new under the sun, and probably not even foreign to Nigeria. It may have happened in another African country, even probably even the US, which I actually believe that a lot of things that are playing out now are things that sort of new countries experience, because we're just in our 60s, right? Are we I think we're in our 60s as a country. So you think of how, like I said again earlier, monetary policies are formed. What's the CBN doing? How are they borrowing money? Then you think of the politics, how are political parties formed, But then if you check history as well, some of the things that our politicians are doing, some of the things that people are doing, is the same. There's somewhere that someone may have consulted to say, okay, let's try out this thing. And it may not always work out well. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it may not work out well. But again, if we look back, that information is power. And we can also try and just, what should we do in this situation? If someone has done it before, how can we prescribe or, this prescription to this problem, this unique problem we have?
And what about like for creatives in particular?
Okay.
Like the writers, the photographers, the artists, what's the importance of them having information?
Okay. The If I think about it in terms of most of my work is communal, it happens in community, strength of individuals. And thankfully, you mentioned photographers, writers, and that is one of the things that I intended to do with Awujo. So Awujo it means community, it means the photographers, the writers, researchers, everybody coming in community to make one beautiful, you know, thing, anything at all, and so the importance of knowledge would come in how do we become united by knowing these things, because Nigeria is a very fragile country when you think about a lot of things that keep us divided, in terms of religion, in terms of, politics as well, in terms of other beliefs, values, tribes, So if I'm a photographer and I'm well informed, or an artist, and we are all beautiful, diverse, how then do we, have an ideology that's united in a way that makes us work together to achieve our goal? And mostly anything that we're doing, is towards a united country. When you think about it, what are we producing? How are we trying to make money? How are we trying to move forward as a country? So, yeah,
Though you did a workshop recently, the writing and photography workshop, and how was the experience for you?
it was hectic, very hectic, because it required me to create a curriculum, right? And it took 1 month of planning.
Oh,
Yeah, so my, who I collaborated with was like, oh, let's do something. I was like, yeah, sure, because I love ideas. I'm always down to do anything work wise. So we announced it, but I was also in the thick of something else at the time. I was doing Swap and Shop. Swap and Shop is also a community-led model as well. People donate into the swap bank, and then people get tokens. It's almost like it's decentralized when you think of crypto, right? In terms of the value you get. So we're able to tokenize it, maybe a t-shirt, a bag. We are able to allot tokens to the people who donate. So then you can accrue up to like 200 tokens, which we peg to 1,000 per token. So if you get 200 tokens, it's basically 200,000 naira from just things that were just lying in your house you weren't using. So anyway, I was planning Swap and Shop. We finished Swap and Shop, and I had to, dive straight into planning this workshop. And then I had, to the communications part of it. Again, I called for volunteers, but it's something that's also new in terms of, I wouldn't say in the world or in Nigeria, but in terms of the approach, the model that we
yeah,
used,
yeah.
because it was kind of confusing. We tried to explain several times, or try to communicate what it was going to do and how we're going to approach it, but people didn't get it. So for the first day, what we did was select photographs, and then try and teach people how does this evoke emotion in you in terms of migration and movement, right? And then the first 3 seconds where you capture a photograph. But it was also a reflective exercise because we had people write what they felt. Second day, we had people listen to audio documentaries, audio dramas, podcasts, excerpts, and then people were able to identify, okay, I can hear the whisking of eggs, I can hear a staircase, I can hear a family, you know, the father, the mother, talking about normal family stuff. So it was invoking in a way that, inspired them to think without watching, or looking without the visual aspect. So they also wrote again from that. On the third day, we tried to do first drafts. We did story excerpts, essay excerpts from my favorite authors, Aridanti Roy, Nora Ephron. I think his name is Michael Szyboski, or Stephen Szyboski. I think it's Stephen Szyboski. The Perks of Being a Wallflower. So we took excerpts from that, and we're trying to use these writers as a template. How do we extract their work, but in a way that is teachable, that people can then say, okay, they are talking about seasons, they are contradicting sentences here. They talk about time, about remembrance and memory. So how can you then take that and do that as a writer in this workshop? Then the fourth day, we saw some films. The Promise of the Opening was the title of that particular day workshop. So we were looking at how, if you see this particular film, how can you revise your first drafts during this stage of the workshop? If you have something, because you've seen this opening that arrests you from the moment you encounter it, how can you then rewrite your own first drafts that arrest people the moment they see it the first time? So, and then on the fifth day, like I said, the whole curriculum was just me, because again, this novel, there was nobody to turn to look or ask questions. Okay, how do I do this? The fifth day was the peer workshop, and I think this is where my corporate experience comes from. So I'm able to, you know, create all of these things from my corporate experience and then put it into this different thing. So it was this thing where you sit down with your peer, and then there was a form where you're able to ask them questions. You read their drafts. We printed their first drafts. You read it, and you're able to give constructive feedback on, what you've read. Ask them questions and prescribe, something that you think they should work on better. And then the final day was Saturday. We called it the workshop salon, because now we invited the public to come and witness what these guys have done over the past 5 days. It was the sixth day of the workshop. One, two, three, four, five, six. So yes, it was a lot. So this sixth day, we had people now, because they went home based on the learnings of the peer workshop. They went home to revise their drafts, and then they came and yeah. So they sent in the final draft over that night, and then we printed that again and then shared it to everybody. Then we had another editorial criteria, and then we distributed it to the members of the public. They acted as live judges, as live editors. So they read and then they give like 1, 2, 3. Is it a good structure? Are they is it good command of English, or all of those things, and then we decided on our winner.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's really packed.
I'm
Really
sorry.
packed.
Yeah, it took a lot
No,
to.
no, no. Like the whole workshop itself, like very beautiful, very amazing. I'm sure that you're also able to learn a lot from it as well,
Yeah,
from even teaching people.
yeah.
So you describe yourself as someone who likes to follow your own curiosity, and I think as a creative and also like obviously as a researcher, that's like a very important, should I say skill?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So what has been occupying your curiosity?
Recently,
Yeah.
oh yes, I went to Kaduna,
Oh.
and in Kaduna, I had this idea that pitched to Open Arts, where it was a short stay residency, right? I pitched this beautiful idea that on this table are some of my friends' journals, right? She has had them from the early 2000s, and she just journals about her life, what she's learning, meditation, prayer life, friendships, and she has different, journals for each thing. So I mean, she knows I work with, nonfiction stories, and then I try to make workshops of those things. So she was like, I think you should help me digitize my journals. So yeah, I have my scanner here, and then I digitized them already. But then I wanted to take what I learned from this, because she also wanted me to make handwriting into handwritten fonts. So
Wow.
she also, it's a whole process where she, writes, small caps, and is it small lower caps and
Yeah,
upper,
no. Yeah.
yes. So she did that, and then I'm still in the process of that. But the idea was to take that to Kaduna. But during when we were drafting the itinerary, what I should do, because up until now, I've been working with online archives, right? So I go to archiving's websites, and then I'm looking at newspapers, or I go to YouTube videos, looking at old videos, like I said, ads, advertisements as well. So I realized that there was a national archives in Kaduna. So I was like, okay, participants of the workshop, let's visit the National Archives first, and then afterward, I can show them this interesting project, which I titled Scanning and Digitizing the Self, right? So on the night before the day, I asked myself, what exactly do I want us to focus on? Because archives is a large, storage of old things. And I said trade because you had asked one question earlier that I wanted to say for. So what I started my research process was I worked in the African School of Economics for a year. I started as an intern and then I was promoted twice before I left. Then I became on something and then I became communications officer too. But most of the things I was doing there was researching on African history, culture, spotlighting curators, what. So it was there I had this brilliant idea to research on trade history in northern Nigeria. And then that night before the excursion, it came back to me as okay, I think I should focus on trade. So I had to now design, a thing where we collect the things that we're going to. I have some of it here to look at. So one of the questions was, how did Kaduna's market change as the city expanded? Which goods were most important to trade in northern Nigeria? And I think I have something more for context here. So here we have like the researcher's name, what, but one of the things that I needed people to take was, what would interest them the most. So I have markets, cotton, groundnuts, railways. Surprisingly enough, most people chose cotton for some reason, but for good reason because in Kaduna, apparently Kaduna was this textile hub where cotton, yes, they had like cotton farms and people really, yeah, cotton farms and textile history is mostly in Kaduna. So they were not wrong or far off when they were choosing that particular checklist. So it influenced all the archival material we looked through that day. Policy on cotton, you know, you're looking at the immigrants, people investing in cotton. You're looking at the balance sheets. How much is going in, how much are they paying the workers, the wages to, daily wage to workers. Very interesting. So that has been, I don't know, say a roundabout way to answer your question, but that's something that has been occupying my mind recently.
So for someone who has a question that they can't stop thinking about and something that they want to conduct research on,
Yeah.
how do you think they should turn that curiosity into like research?
Curiosity into research. That's a very, I think you start from anywhere. Ask Google first. I ask Google anything, right? So yeah, ask Google anything if you're trying to research. Another place I love to go on is Google's Google's Scholar, Google Scholar. Yeah. So it can be anything. Oh. Why do people laugh? Why do people talk to each other? Those are the kind of things that sometimes questions in my mind. And I go to Google Scholar and I can read an entire journal about it. So yes, read journals mostly. Yes, read journals. From reading a lot, then you can start to form, because then in the journals you see how they were able to do their methodologies, the questions that they asked, and then you can start phrasing your questions. And you don't have to start in a very professional way, because last year was what I was still doing was still experimental. I was just bringing people together, trying to know because my first workshop, people hardly wrote anything because it was a lot, especially like I said, my model is to bring writing to non-writers, right? So some people were crying. Yes, because again, it was self-reflective. It was cathartic for people where they were like, I haven't thought about myself this way ever. Some people said, in years, you made me see threads in my family history, and maybe this is why I actually like what I like, because people were able to say, okay, I like music, I love design, So, yeah, so from there you start to form research questions. Just start from where you want to start, but still read a lot at the same time.